Okay, great.
We are recording.
It is 10:03 and the meeting of the Oil and Gas Conservation Commission is coming to order. Let's establish a quorum. Frank Thorwald.
Stephen Cooper.
Bill Fire-Robin.
Madeline Greenbaum.
Just the
sorry.
commission. That's okay. We have a quorum. Any conflicts of interest? Hearing none, let's move on to item 2, the meeting minutes for January 18th. Do we have any changes in those meeting minutes? Hearing none, I look for a motion to approve those meeting minutes for January 18th for the public meeting.
So moved.
Second? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. January 18th minutes for the Cobalt public meeting. Any changes or corrections? Hearing none, do I have a motion to approve those minutes?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion carries. Moving on to item 3. This is the presentation by Plains. Would you like to proceed, sir?
Yes. Okay, so
If you can introduce yourself first, since this
Yes.
is recorded, I'd appreciate it.
absolutely. So my name is Mike Lesko. I'm manager of carbon integrity for Plains Midstream Canada, Plains LPG Services. I live in Calgary, Alberta. Come down to the Bumstead facility, which is our facility within the Phoenix area.
I can't hear him.
Here, let's.
I'll take it up here. Thanks. There. Can you hear me?
I mean, I can hear him, but it's not clear.
Okay, right on.
Now
So.
I can, yes.
I'm a professional engineer in the provinces of Alberta and Saskatchewan, and I've been doing cavern integrity and cavern-related work since about 2006. I cut my teeth on the industry down in Gulf Coast. Did most of my work in Texas and Louisiana, Mississippi, before moving back to Canada, where I'm originally from. Prior to that, I worked in civil geotechnical engineering and mining engineering and diamond exploration and farming and all sorts of other things before embarking on this career. So today I will be presenting a little bit about our company, very little bit about our company, but also for the most part how to, an overview of how to create underground storage for the storage of hydrocarbons, as well as things that go along with the maintenance and testing and things like that. So we've got a presentation, a PowerPoint presentation. For those on the phone, you've got a copy of the presentation, I believe?
Yeah, I've seen it.
Okay.
I'm looking at it.
Right on. So we're going to go through the presentation now, and hopefully this goes pretty quick. Here's the title page. Next slide, please. So there's a couple things that our company insists that we do in the presentations before proceeding. So for Plains, we're committed to conducting our operations in a manner that protects the safety and security of the public, our employees and contractors, and the safety, security, and integrity of all our assets, including property and the protection and stewardship of the environment. Next slide, please. Here's a little bit of our company overview. We are a wholly owned subsidiary of Plains All American. We have operations all over North America, Canada, and the United States. And our mission is to connect our network of people and assets to safely deliver exceptional results. And we employ about 1,400 people. Next slide, please. So this presentation that I'll go over, the agenda is the purpose of underground storage in caverns, locations of our caverns, cavern development overview, cavern maintenance overview, and roles and responsibility of my group, the Cavern Integrity Group, and maybe there will be some time for some questions and answers. Next slide, please.
I have a quick interruption.
Yep.
Apologies. It looks like this conference phone will now work. You mind if I try and reach him on the phone? That way he'll be able to hear us much better.
Go ahead.
Okay, Dale,
Yes.
could you hang up? Because I think the conference phone is now going to work. I can call you directly on the conference phone and you'll be able to hear much better.
You can proceed without me too, because I've read this.
No, it's okay. We need you as, so we'll call you right now.
Okay.
I've got the redial button ready.
All good? Okay.
One moment here while
One
we...
moment.
Mike, we appreciate you coming to do this.
Oh, thank you. It's my pleasure.
Hello?
Hi, Dale. It's Dennis Turner. This should be a much better reception now. For some reason, the conference phone wasn't registering with the network. It took a long time for it to do that, so
Oh, okay.
it's fixed
Yeah,
now. apparently.
this is better, yeah.
Okay, good.
All right.
All right, Mike, proceed. Sorry
Okay.
for that interruption.
Oh, no problem. So, what is cavern storage and why do we have it? So, caverns are essentially large voids deep underground. Caverns require the right geology in the right place. You have to be along like a pipeline right away, or where you've got rail and truck deliveries, and that makes the location important, but at that location you also need the right geology. Salt is a pseudo-solid. It's a vitreous liquid. It's got a very low permeability, infinitesimally low, in fact, which makes it the perfect medium to store and contain fluids underground. With salt caverns particularly, these are generally quite large. We're talking about 1 million barrels for the average salt cavern in the Gulf Coast. I want to say it's closer to 3 million. Some of the biggest salt caverns in the world that I've come across are 58 million barrels, which takes up a lot of, it provides a lot of capacity for storage. Some of the reasons for storage in caverns is it's got a small surface impact. It essentially replaces spheres and bullets and surface tankage with a wellhead. So you have a small surface impact. That mixed with the large size make them perfect for hedging and peak shaving. That's buy low, sell high, or store it as you're making it and release it back when you have peak demands. An example of large use cavern storage is the U.S. Strategic Petroleum Reserves, which are some of the largest oil reserves in the world, and those came about after the OPEC crisis. I believe that was 1974. Next slide, please. So, just to give you an idea of where our facilities are, these are just Plains' facilities, but other companies store in generally the same areas. This is a map from the Salt, the Salt Institute, showing major salt deposits in North America. So, for Plains, we store in Western Canada, Eastern Canada, but also Michigan. We've got a few sites in Michigan. We store in the Gulf Coast. That's our sister companies. They store natural gas through Plains Natural Gas. We do have one hard rock mine, which is a granite mine that stores liquids over here. That's not salt, so we won't talk about that. And then, of course, our Bumstead facility in Phoenix. Next slide, please. So the origin of the salt deposits began about 400 million years ago in the Devonian period, which is the age of the fish. And Phoenix got labeled here with a little star. You can see it was underwater. Next slide, please. And so what happens is low spots in the earth get filled with water. Next slide. This is salt water, saline water, and covers the landscape, inland oceans, if you will. Next slide. And when those oceans evaporate, it leaves behind large salt deposits. In many cases, these are hundreds to thousands of feet thick. These salt deposits then then were covered by different strata. Next slide, please. That confine the salt, and it's in these that we produce the caverns. Next slide. So here's a little image showing, the wellheads at surface and the cavern voids within the salt. Next slide. So this is off, one of the Arizona geology publications. As you might have seen before, but here's the Luke salt body, and the star indicates where our facility is just in Glendale, I guess. Right? And this red cross section, this line here, going through that. Next slide, please. Illustrates the geology through the area. So again, the salt is quite thick, and where that star is, that's our facility, approximately. So, next slide. So how do you develop a salt cavern? Well, you start with drilling. It's usually the biggest drilling rigs that you can find, because one of the critical points the critical aspects of underground storage is you need good throughput. So you need a big pipe, and in this case, it's big casing. So usually get the biggest rigs you can, because currently, if you were to drill a new cavern well, the production casing would be in the order of 20-inch to even 24-inch.
Oh.
Yeah, so quite big. 3 decades ago, a big surface casing or a big production casing would have been 10 3/4 inch. So advances in both tubulars and in drilling technologies have allowed for larger pipes, because the larger the pipe you have going into the ground, the faster you can move in and out, but it also gives you ability to make repairs if there's any, say, excessive corrosion or casing damage. Next slide, please. So this is just a schematic for those that haven't seen drilling before. This is kind of how drilling is done. You drill using a mud system and a bit. You circulate the mud down the work string to the bit. That cools the bit and causes the cuttings in the rock to be delivered back to surface. That goes through a shaker system to get the big chunks of rock out, and then recirculates the mud. So that's drilling in a nutshell. Next slide. And then once you're done drilling, you attach what we call a washing wellhead. It's a solution mining wellhead. And so in this picture, this is a wellhead from a job I worked on in Louisiana. There was in this spool is your control fluid. In this spool, you've got your brine returns from injecting water, and in this spool you've got the water where you inject the non-saline water down into the salt. It dissolves the salt, and then it's back up out here to either ponds or disposal wells. Next slide. So when you're solution mining a cavern, mining out the void space that you eventually will be storing your hydrocarbon in, it looks a little like this. I forget where this slide was from. As you can tell, it's in French, but I do have some of the English translations there. So as you're solution mining, you're injecting water down a suspended casing that is off the wellhead. It goes into the salt body, dissolves the salt, and then the brine comes back in and up through the annulus between the cemented. Let me back up. Sorry, I'll apologize. There's 2 suspended casings into the well. The inner one is your non-saline water, fresh water, if you will, and then up the annulus between the outer suspended casing and the inner suspended casing is your brine, and on the backside you have a control fluid. This is either like a diesel fuel or a butane or a nitrogen, and that allows you to control the shape of your cavern, because ultimately you want to have a cavern shape that is that of a carrot or a turnip in cross section, because it allows you a little more control to inject and withdraw your hydrocarbons at the end of the day. That being said, there's a lot of caverns out there that have very broad flat roofs at the top, and those are just a little more challenging to get all your product out when you need to do some well work and keep it safe for the crews. Next slide, please. So here is an image of a completed cavern well in operation. So you'll notice that one of the suspended casings or tubings has been pulled out of the well, and now you just have the single tubing in that is a brine displacement string. So what is this showing is that in the yellow here, that's your hydrocarbon, and the blue is your brine. And how you use the cavern is you inject your hydrocarbon, that will displace your brine out into a brine pond. Next slide. And if you want to get the hydrocarbon out, you just reverse the process. I got some slides later on. To show you an example of depth and size and shape of caverns, I've got 3 caverns from different facilities that we operate. Our deepest caverns are at Fort Saskatchewan in northern Alberta, which are about 6,300 feet. And they're about anywhere from 750,000 barrels to about 1 million too. We've got Sarnia, Ontario. These are actually very small caverns. They're about 300 to 350,000 barrels and actually fairly shallow. And then we have the Bumpstead caverns, which are about 1,600 feet. But you'll notice that they're long and skinny, an ideal shape for stress control and geomechanical, geotechnical ideal shape for a cavern. And as you can see, these are quite tall and skinny, and that's almost a perfect shape for a cavern. Next slide. So for these types of liquid storage caverns, you need some sort of brine supply and containment. So this is an image of one of the larger cavern storage facilities in Fort Saskatchewan, and you can see all of these brine ponds at surface. And so the surface brine ponds will contain the brine so that when the caverns are full, the ponds are full of brine because all the hydrocarbon has displaced all that brine into the pond. And when you want to empty the caverns, all that brine goes back into the cavern, displacing the hydrocarbon out. So you'll know if a facility is empty of hydrocarbons when their ponds are quite full. And the reverse is true for when the caverns are full of product. Next slide, please. So here's another schematic showing the brine displacement of hydrocarbons. As you bring the hydrocarbons into the facility, whether it's pipeline or rail or truck, that goes through some of the process facility and then into the cavern. That displaces the hydrocarbon, or that displaces the brine out to the pond. And when you go to either fill the rail car, fill the truck, or fill the pipeline, it's just a reverse process. And all of this stuff over here, this is where you get your dehydration of the product, any other sort of facility treatment that you need to do, the quality control before you ship it to customers. Next slide. So here's just a close-up of the brine ponds at Bumpstead. One thing to note that is quite unique about these is that, as you know, Phoenix is a pretty hot and dry place. You can see all the salt crusting up on the brine pond. What that means to me is that there's very limited growth of the caverns at Bumpstead. In fact, our cavern growth is about -1%. They're actually shrinking. Because if you remember, the salt is a vitreous liquid, it's a pseudo-solid. It actually moves, it actually creeps a little bit. That allows it, again, to have low permeability, but it also changes the shape of the cavern. And because Arizona is such a hot and dry place, you don't get lots of cavern growth through operation. Other locations, we can see up to 6% growth every year, so they get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And the reason for that is climate. Out in Michigan, for example, they get a lot of rain. They're off the Great Lakes. They get a lot of rain, they get a lot of snow, plus they get cold temperatures. So when you have cold temperatures, the saturation of the brine decreases when the brine is being stored at surface. you actually get salt crystals falling out as the brine cools, so that when it goes back into the cavern, it warms up because of the geothermal energy gradient in the cavern. And it heats up this weak brine, which causes the brine to then continue to solution mine the cavern, and you get growth. The opposite is true here. It's almost just as warm at surface as it is in the cavern void. And you get a really high salt saturated brine going in and out. Next slide, please. So getting into the regulatory requirements, and this is the topic of discussion at the last meeting. Normally, well, actually, I shouldn't say normally. In all locations in North America now, a workover is required at a frequency of 10 years, and that's either following CSAs at 341 or API RP1150. And what a workover entails is you pull all that suspended tubing out of the well. You do casing inspection logging, corrosion logs to monitor corrosion, and then refurbish the wellhead. But it is probably the most dangerous thing that we do, because you are cracking open the wellhead and pulling everything out, exposing the well to the environment, right? And of course we have all sorts of controls on that, but it is a very intrusive affair. Next slide, please. And we did talk about sonars last time and the requirement of sonars to evaluate capacity. And I threw this slide up for an example. So here's Cavern 3 at our Bumstead facility. Here is a sonar from 1979, and you can kind of see how crude it is. With most technologies, as you go ahead in time, things get better, and there's always improvements. This is a sonar from last year. That we did on the same cavern. As you can see, the shape is considerably different, and that could have just been from years of operation and how they operated. We're not the original owner. It used to be AmeriGas, right? And so there is some gaps in the record, something that my team has been working with Dennis, trying to gather whatever records are out there, historical, because historical records are always good. But one thing I wanted to show on this is just how much definition you get from the new sonars. Like in this one, you can see the bedding planes within the salt, within the walls. You can kind of see, ledges and things like that were not visible back in these days. Right? So the sonars have gotten very good, and we do a lot of through-pipe sonars. Now that being said, every 10 years we'll still be pulling everything out and doing an open hole sonar, which gives you some small advantages, but not the degree of quality, better quality that existed, say, 10 or 15 years ago even, right? So, next slide. The other part of what we do is mechanical integrity testings, or MITs, and this is very critical for us. It's basically a pressure test of the cavern, and we follow right now the most robust testing standard that we know of, which is CSA Z341. But that standard, it's Canadian Standards Association, that standard was based on Department of Environmental Quality of Kansas, which was then adopted by the Railroad Commission of Texas, or Texas Railroad Commission as most people call it. And those kind of same rules apply to many other jurisdictions, such as Kansas and Texas and Louisiana. So we're all pretty much on the same page in Arizona as everywhere else in the United States and Canada. And it is following a fairly robust standard. Now, the only difference between those jurisdictions and Arizona is the requirement of this capacity survey, which is the sonar every 5 years. And we're okay with that, because we still will be performing a mechanical integrity test, which is this pressure test, every 5 years. It's just an add-on to that. So during the mechanical integrity test, we pressure up the cavern with brine to begin with, up to our calculated pressure, and then we inject in nitrogen down below the casing shoe or the cemented casing point into the cavern. And then we log that interface using geophysical tools and essentially do a mass balance before and after of nitrogen at 1.1 times the maximum operating pressure. So, and then we calculate a leak rate, and that leak rate has to be within a certain criteria. So in this case, we calculate like basically the error in the calculation, and that leak rate has to be less than the error in the calculation. And that follows the standards that we follow. And that's also the same standards, again, as Kansas or Louisiana or Texas. So it's pretty, and because we're testing with nitrogen and not a liquid, nitrogen has the ability to find small leaks. And if you can find a small leak, then, you know, it's something that needs to be repaired. If you were to test with liquid, which is done in other jurisdictions, you might not necessarily find that small leak, because gas will always find a smaller leak than a liquid would, just because of the particle size. Right. Next slide, please. So for this mechanical integrity testing, I got a couple pictures up. We have you know, very high quality digital pressure gauges, pressure recorders. This is a picture showing the crane and the well pressure control, the wireline truck that would be hoisting the geophysical equipment is right here, so it's kind of a perspective that way. And here's the nitrogen pumper pumping nitrogen into the well. Next slide. And then from that, we do a whole bunch of math to basically come up with a leak rate. And therein is the test. So next slide. So our goal is to ensure that our assets are safe to operate, that they're not leaking, that there's no other issues mechanically or potential issues coming up. We do a lot of strategic planning. We do a lot of risk management. We have quite a detailed risk register and risk management documentation and spreadsheets. And ultimately, the goal is to prevent, you know, things like this. So here's a butane well. By the way, none of these are Plains assets. These were just pictures that I've taken throughout my career at other facilities. This one was leaking butane at the wellhead. You can see the frosting at the wellhead. This is just an ugly wellhead. I won't tell you who owns this one, but it's, this is an embarrassment. There's just lots of scale on that tubing that was pulled, which indicates that there's an issue probably with the water and just a chemical change happening, like chemical chemistry in the water chemistry reaction. And then this is a split pipe that was done using explosive cutters to free it from where it was locked in the cavern. Due to a roof fall, a piece of salt falling off, hitting the pipe, and causing it to lock in. So that's a way to kind of free it from. There's a lot of tools out there that allow you to pull pipe that is locked in the ground. But next slide. So my group, we manage 77 caverns across North America, about 115 wells. I've got a team of 4, including myself. We try to stay ahead of the new research that's out there by active participation in several industry committees and standard committees. And then we also work with other business units such as Donald's here, operations, our business development group. We manage solution mining programs for new caverns that we develop. Of course, with our commercial group, they're the guys that buy and sell the product. Next slide. And that is it for my presentation. Happy to answer any questions you may have. Yes?
I got a couple, so if anybody has one question, go ahead. What are all the salt sodium chloride, or do you get some? You know, normally with evaporation, get a whole sequence, potash,
Yes.
on and on. Is it pretty much at Bumstead sodium chloride?
Sodium chloride.
Toward-
It's very pure sodium chloride. salt.
Really, that much?
Homestead, yeah. And,
Okay.
and you could almost see that on the brine pond picture,
Yeah.
which showed it was quite white. Other facilities, we get a lot of carnallite, lots of potassium
Yeah,
chlorides.
exactly.
And also purity. I don't know too much about the original, because we didn't build these caverns, about how pure the salt is and how much insolubles fell out.
Yeah.
Or non-salt minerals fell out when they were constructing or solution mining the Bumstead caverns. But I do know that at some of our other facilities, it could be quite dirty. Up to 30% of your solution mine area is not void space because of insolubles that fall out
Yeah.
and cover the bottom. And we have other facilities that the sodium chloride crystals are over a foot in diameter.
Oh, jeez.
Like, it's so pure. When you look at the core, you're almost looking through a clear glass window because the crystallization is incredibly like pure sodium chloride. Like,
Yeah.
It's beautiful. Yeah.
That's odd.
Before you go on, don't
Okay.
you have some kind of arrangement at Bumstead with Morton or some other salt?
Yes, I'll let Donald
With Morton.
talk to that.
Yeah, we, with our capacity of our caverns versus our brine storage, if we bring a lot of product in, we have to go somewhere with the excess brine. So we send our brine over to Morton in the summertime, and then towards the end of the year when we're taking our product out of the caverns, Morton will send us brine back to offset what we sent them earlier in the year, so we can get all of our product out of the holes. So we got a working relationship with Morton on our exchange of brine back and forth.
Okay, wow, good.
It's very beneficial.
Yeah,
Most facilities
it's
don't
great that
have
we got
that.
that working relationship with them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
We help them out in the summer when they're needing brine because of the evaporation rate and everything for them to grow salt in their ponds.
okay.
And then in the wintertime, we need some brine back, and they keep solution mining pretty much around the clock over there, so they need somewhere to go with their brine in the wintertime because their ponds are full, so then they send it to us.
Okay, great, excellent. Which actually might lead to the answer on one question I had. It's true we have a dry climate, but it's also true we have monsoon rains that can just dump and totally change the chemistry of what's in your ponds. Is that how you kind of handle that?
We keep our salinity in the 96 to 95 to 97% salinity solution, so that we're not growing our ponds, or our caverns, we're not growing them, and we're not making them smaller. So there'll be times when the brine salinity will get up, closer to 99, and we'll dump some fresh water in our ponds to bring that salinity down and keep from growing salt in our brine ponds.
Yeah,
Right now, you can look at our ponds, we're almost empty. We're down to about 8 feet in our ponds right now, and our walls are clean.
okay.
We just got a build up in the bottom, but we run fresh water in there to keep that salinity down.
So
96.
in reality, monsoon rain, just getting
They don't-
dumped
they
on
don't-
doesn't really
yeah, they
change it
don't-
that
they
much.
don't change them that much.
Okay. What's the actual product you store there? We keep talking about product, but what is it you store? Is it petroleum? Is it
We've got
a gas or?
We've got three products. We've got a butamer, which is a higher grade butane,
Okay.
ISO level. We've got a refinery grade butane that's basically just dirty butane that we send back to the refinery to be reprocessed. And then we've got propane.
Okay.
All of our butanes and our refinery grade butane goes out by rail back to our facility in San Pedro or Bakersfield.
Okay.
And then the majority of our propane's all hauled out by truck to the surrounding states to
Okay.
propane retail facilities.
So you have two caverns
got 3.
Oh, you got 3, so each
Yes.
cavern has a dedicated product,
Yes, sir.
okay. And then last one, you were talking a little bit on the evolution of that, for example, decades ago it'd be like about 10-inch pipe, and now it's 20-inch pipe. Is that kind of a sequential change? You know, it went from 10 to 12 to 15 and a half, or was it 10
Yes. Nope, it was, so 10 3/4 was pretty popular in the 70s. And I'm not sure when in the 80s you
more or
started
less
to become
80s.
13 3/8.
Yeah.
13 5/8. And then that was popular right up until, I want to say around, call it 2010.
Mhm.
And then, especially in the Gulf Coast, they started putting in like 20-inch. And now, like for example, back in 2007 when I was down there, guys were still putting in 13 3/8-inch production casing.
Okay.
And now I think they're all doing 20-inch to 24-inch.
And is that the same materials you used to on your piping? I mean, was it? What I'm getting at is,
No,
you know,
so the
there's
grades have changed.
the grades have changed,
So
and
it's
that
higher alloy grades, higher compressive strength, higher tensile strength, higher burst strength
okay,
to match what your pressures are downhole.
okay,
And costs. Like, of course, back in the 80s, you could get a high alloy 20-inch production casing, but it would cost you like an insane amount of money. And so nobody did it, right? It's all economics based, capital expenditure based versus what you're going to make from operating the cavern. So, but now this day and age, it's much easier to get larger diameter, higher alloy tubulars, oil country tubular goods,
okay.
for an economical price, and that's where you want to go. Like, that's one of the negatives of cavern storage compared to surface storage is if you got a big tank or a big bullet, well, you could have a 45-inch pipe going up to it, right? Whatever size you want to make it,
Mhm.
right? But underground, you have to consider that, once you cement it in, that's it. There's no flanging up a
Yeah.
bigger size, right, or going in, putting in a bigger pipe like you can do for surface facilities. The other contributing factor to that is drilling technology. Better bits, better mud systems, and all that stuff allows you to drill the bigger hole that you need to drill to put in that bigger pipe and control the hole. Right.
So in your annual workovers, have you pretty well gone through and pulled old pipe from decades ago and replaced it with newer pipe, or
Yes,
is it?
so usually, and it depends on which area you're working in, and the level of corrosion, both from your brine system or from the product system side of the system. Depends on what you're storing. Does that product have more higher H2S in it, for example? If you pull your pipe after 10 years, some of it looks so good you can still see the stenciling on the side. Other areas, you'll pull it in 10 years and it looks like Swiss cheese, right? Because it's, and then that's when you adjust your program that, you got to have a more frequent workover because of corrosion issues. At Bumstead, for example, we don't have those corrosion issues. And so 10 years is quite adequate. But usually every 20 years, you're replacing an entire string of pipe.
So since Bumstead has been around for a couple of decades, have you pretty well replaced the pipe and the original drill pipe? Has that been replaced?
The tubing? It's been replaced a few times.
Okay.
If you go there, it's parking lot barricades at the facility. All the old pipe we just.
Okay.
Or we'll scrap it. Like the thing is, Arizona isn't a big oil and gas center, so. Normally, if you're in an oil and gas center, you can take the pipe, you inspect it, you send it off to get recut. So usually the problem's at your collar connections, and so you'll cut those off and you'll rethread it with it, because the wall of the pipe is usually much thicker than at the threaded ends, right? So, but here, because shipping all that old pipe down to New Mexico or West Texas to get recut, you might as well buy new stuff. And
Yeah,
that's what we tend to do, because you won't know how bad it is until you pull it out of the well. So, for example, if you think, well, I think 20% will need recuts, because it's not really the corrosion that we're always looking at on the pipe. It's also, are the threaded connections galled when you break it apart?
Yeah.
Like, you don't want crappy threads to thread back in, right?
Mhm.
There's a lot of weight on that pipe. It's being suspended from surface and going down, what did I say, like 2,000 feet, right? So
1,000 at Bumstead, yeah.
yeah, so it's quite a depth and a lot of weight. So you want perfect threads.
Okay.
And when we are running pipe, we have pipe cops, and we've got thread inspectors basically, and on the tongs, making up the pipe.
Yeah.
We've got gauges and everything to make sure that there's no threading issues. Right?
Good.
So
Yeah.
and because there's a lot at stake, you don't want to run in, spend a bunch of money running in, and then go to test it. And when you test it, that's the most stress the cavern sees at any time, because it's above and beyond what the maximum operating pressure is, not even the normal maximum operating pressure. And so it's usually at that time that if you did something wrong, you're going to find it out, and you don't want to lose a whole bunch of pipe in the cavern that you just bought and paid for and ran and spent a bunch of money on.
Yeah.
You want everything to be perfect, because that's the one chance you get.
Sure. Okay.
You look like a fool if you do it.
So, Commissioner Cooper, what do you legal types say? I have no further questions. Does this?
Yeah, except that you always have further questions.
He got me pegged.
Yeah,
Thank
but
you very much.
If you do have any further questions, you got my card, and I'm happy
Yeah.
to respond.
I have a couple comments.
Go ahead, Dale.
Oh, hi, Mike, that was wonderful presentation. I really learned a lot.
Well, thank you.
I've been working with the Oil and Gas Commission for many, many years here, but I've never been out to that facility, and I've never even thought much about how it works. So I really appreciate you doing that. But I do have a couple of comments that I don't want to give your generalized statement about the salt being formed in the oceans, which is generally true, but in Arizona, most of our really thick salt deposits were formed in closed, landlocked basins, where the water accumulated over millions of years, and the salt was deposited as it evaporated. So that's true of the loop salt dome basin, so most of them, and in my PowerPoint presentation that I'll talk about a little bit later, I show a figure there that shows the location of salt deposits in Arizona. That's on page 44. But the Holbrook Basin, in which we also have gas storage, that was a marine basin, a marine environment deposition back about 250 million years ago. So just a little bit to focus on Arizona's situation. If you don't mind, I wanted to make those comments.
No, that's awesome. And I wasn't aware of that. And it's always good to learn something new about the facilities that we operate.
Dennis can give you the link to my PowerPoint presentation if you want to follow up on that. It's
that would be great.
A lot more than the salt deposits, but it's something that I think that you might be interested in.
Perfect. Yes. No, I would. I'd appreciate that.
Joe?
Oh, yeah, I was kind of almost the same question Dale had too. I was going to make, I didn't think the Loop Salt Basin was a big marine. It's not Devonian either. It's far more recent than that. It's,
oh, is it? Really?
Sometime in the Cenozoic or something.
Yeah, these non-marine basins are about 25 million years ago.
Right. Yeah, Steve Rousey has a good
Age of
publication.
the salts.
Yeah, Steve Rousey had a good publication on the salt basins here in Arizona too. He used to be the administrator here for the Oil and Gas Commission. He's with the Arizona Geological Survey.
Yeah. No, perfect. Well, that's good information for me. Yeah, these were kind of generalized slides because.
Yeah, I understand that. I appreciate it.
But always good to learn something new.
I've been out to your facility there and toured it. It was a very nice presentation, and I enjoyed looking at it. Just for everybody's being informed here. I'd like to ask a couple things that I already know the answers to because you've told me about it in the past, but the potential for anything to explode, in other words, the safety of the facility, terrorists that can do damage to any of these kinds of facilities. Can you elaborate on that?
So the nice thing about underground storage is that it comes up to a wellhead, right? The bulk of your volume is hundreds of feet, thousands of feet underground, which logically you would, if you compared it to say a sphere at surface, much smaller target. And even if you were to knock the wellhead right off, everything would be coming out of one pipe. If you compare that to a sphere, and I always refer to spheres because the products that we store typically would be in a sphere to keep the high pressure on it, to keep it in liquid state. So if you were to shear off the wellhead, there are companies out there, Halliburton, Boots and Coots, that are well versed in well intervention. There are companies that during the first Iraq War, there was lots of sabotage done to wellheads, and a lot of American well intervention companies that had gone over there to basically plug and cap wells that were burning, right? That is one advantage of underground storage in caverns versus the alternative, which would be spheres. Anything else? And I think the other thing that on a security basis, and I've heard this from several other operators, is not a lot of people know about underground storage, and it's not a well-known industry category, right? Like if I meet a lot of people that, oh yeah, I know the white tanks on the outskirts of cities, fly over them all the time when I'm coming into the airport, and I know it stores all sorts of like flammable stuff, but when you say, yeah, I work in underground storage salt caverns, they're like, what? Those exist? Yeah, there's like 40 under this city, really? It's a bit of a, it's not a well-known or well-publicized method of storing large volumes of hydrocarbons.
Yeah, one more point I'd like to make there, Mike, is that, this is all stored in the absence of oxygen, so you couldn't get a massive explosion underground.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. Yeah, that gets asked all the time too. And especially with corrosion, a lot of people, and going back to the corrosion point, a lot of people say, oh, you store in salt water. Well, all your steel must be completely eaten up. And no, like I said, sometimes after 10 years you'll pull tubing and you can still read the stenciling on the tubing until it lays in the rack for a couple hours, then it turns bright orange. And it's all just because there's no oxygen underground to provide that corrosive environment. But yeah, no, absolutely, no chance. There's one underground fire that I know of in a cavern, and that was at Mont Belvieu, and they were storing ethyl butadiene, which is a product used in tires, and it spontaneously combusts, and as it gets warmer, the combustion happens quicker. And that was a big incident down in Mont Belvieu about 2 years ago.
Louisiana?
Texas, yeah, Mont Belvieu, Texas. But that was a refined product that had, the ability to burn without oxygen.
Any other questions for Mike?
I've got a couple, and feel free to jump in, because some of these might go, they might dovetail between the two of you. I saw a slide that the sonar in '79. How long has Bumstead been in production?
1974.
What is it? And with the three caverns there, what is the capacity?
Donald?
We've got 135 million gallon of usable capacity.
Do you know how much water you guys use a year in that facility?
All of mine's pretty much recycled, you know. I used, what, 17 acre feet, I think, actually, is all I actually used out of our one little water well.
That's makeup water?
That just make up water. We, after we get through pumping a set of 30 rail cars, and we'll take fresh water and wash down our brine stream to clear any salt deposit that's in our brine stream, and then we'll wash across the wellhead going up to the flare system, then into the ponds to get rid of any salt deposit buildup on the inside of our pipes. And that's pretty much the only water we use.
One last question. Can you tell us what you do to basically case or protect basically the brine from getting into the drinking water in that area?
Pretty much, well, our ponds are lined. They're double lined.
But I'm talking about when it's injected back into
in the ground.
Oh, so like there's a surface casing, intermediate casing, and a production casing. So we were talking about production casing sizes. We do have like, and I don't have the schematics in front of me, but
you had it on one slide there.
Pardon me?
You showed them on one slide.
There was one slide that's there.
Do you want to go back to that?
Let me see, just which one it was.
Kind of showed
but I don't.
the colored slide.
Okay.
It was just a general.
Oh yeah, so on the drilling, okay, so slide 50. This one might explain it better. That's the drilling slide. There we go.
Yeah.
So normally you have, when you're drilling these, you have what's called the conductor casing, and that's just a short casing that prevents the ground from sloughing in while you're drilling. Gives you a little immediate surface control. That could be, you know, up to like anywhere from 24 to like 36-inch diameter. It's usually either augered in with like a caisson unit, or it's pile drived, depending on the near surface ground quality. And then it's this one here that is protecting your groundwater. This is what's called the surface casing. And the surface casing is a drilled and cemented casing. The mud is usually a freshwater mud, and the mud, it's using natural materials such as bentonites or montmorillionites, different types of clays. Nothing that has invert properties such as like a hydrocarbon based or gel or something like that. And so this one goes below your groundwater. So if your level of your groundwater is here, this will be below your groundwater, and that protects the groundwater from drilling in this production casing, which goes through, that's much deeper. I don't know off the top of my head how deep this is, but it would have been a usually a regulatory body stipulates how deep that surface casing has to go to protect the groundwater. And because these were 1974, I'm not sure what the rules were at the time. But general, like I know the last ones that we did up in northern Alberta, they were around 650 feet in depth.
But you have permanent casing all the way to the top of salt.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
That's inside the surface casing.
That's inside the surface casing.
So there's still protection below the surface casing.
Yes. So this is put in again using freshwater muds typically, and then cemented to surface, allowed to cure. There's testing, like I'm talking about current times in other jurisdictions. You'd look at the quality of the cement. You'd look at the compressive strength of the cement. You'd actually do a pressure test on the well. Like you'd only drill to that depth, and so then you'd pressure test this to make sure you weren't getting any leaks, and then you'd proceed with drilling and cementing in your production casing. And in some places, depending on the nature of the geology, you might have an intermediate casing, for example. So, for example, in Texas, a lot of it is they've had issues at some of their domes with salt caprock movement, like high degree of movement between the top of the salt dome and the overlying cap rock. And so in a lot of domes, the state has mandated that you have two cemented casings into the salt. And although that doesn't stop the salt cap rock movement impact on your wellbore, it does seem to slow it down, or at least give you an extra barrier of steel and cement.
Plus pulling the casings every 10 years and checking them.
But we don't pull the cemented part, which protects the environment. We pull the brine displacement tubing. But when we do that every 10 years, we do run corrosion logs because we have a corrosion anomaly database on every cavern. Every 10 years we evaluate the log, compare it to past logs, see if anything has changed.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Besides drilling mud, when you're drilling these, do you ever use air?
No, no. It's too deep. Tubulars are too big. The bit is most of the bits are intended to use in a drilling system or a mud system. It's typical oil patch stuff, but no, never used air. And interesting thought though, because I used to do a lot of geotechnical drilling as well, and we'd use air systems all the time, and they worked really great. I'm just wondering about the depth capability of the rigs.
I asked because, at least here in Arizona, in other areas, a lot of the helium wells are drilled by air.
Yeah, are they? And I'm not very familiar with helium drilling. Are they very deep, by any chance, or?
Not particularly.
Not they're just looking for helium. Not very deep. A lot of times they want to go down to the basement, which might be 4,000 to 6,000 feet, but they're at some point they have to convert to mud. But they're just interested in helium. It's a foam type of thing, so it's more like air drilling.
Oh, cool. Very cool. Because I know in the geotechnical days, I loved the air rigs because they were so quick.
Yeah.
You can get a lot of hole done. And
yeah, they're relatively shallow wells.
Thank you, Mike. I appreciate it. It's very appreciate you.
Would you be able to stick around after the meeting or to talk about some questions? Or do you have a plane to catch? Or
nope. We do have a meeting over at Morton this afternoon, but we got some time. I'll be good to stick around for a bit.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Moving on to item 4, a report by the Oil and Gas Administrator. Dennis?
So there's only one agenda item on there, and mostly I'm going to hand it off to Dr. Nations. He and I have been working together on a little project for some improved access to research and other information that Dr. Nations has been doing. Do you want to take over this part, Dale?
Yeah. Can you hear me all right?
Yep, we're good.
Okay. Well, as many of you are aware, I've been an Arizona resident for most of my life. All of my geological experience, actual teaching and research has been concentrated here in the last 30 years. So based on that, my studies of Arizona geology, I prepared this PowerPoint presentation for a meeting at the University of Arizona back in 2008. It's online. It's easy to access. The title of it is Oil and Gas Occurrence and Potential in Arizona. But basically it is an overview of the geology of Arizona with emphasis on the location of past and current oil and gas occurrences, production actually, including helium. And then also did a little bit of projection of the future potential of Arizona for additional oil and gas exploration and but hopefully discovery. The PowerPoint presentation includes 96 photographs. About half of them are photographs of rocks in the field, with emphasis on the rocks that actually have produced oil and gas in Arizona and continue to do so to a very limited extent. So that's basically what it does. I threw it together for that talk using slides, 35 millimeter slides that I had used for my own lectures on the geology of Arizona. So many of them are not very good quality. That's why Dennis and I are working on improving them by using better techniques of photographic techniques. It also includes an overview of the salt deposits in Arizona. Of course, that's the subject that we've just been talking about. And geothermal occurrence of potential geothermal development areas. All of those things, of course, fall within the purview of the Oil and Gas Conservation Commission. So that's briefly, that's what it's about.
And we'd be putting links to Dr. Nation's presentations and some other stuff on the homepage of the Oil and Gas website, which is on the screen there now.
Dale, is that what you sent me a few years ago that I used with the drillers conference here?
Yes, yeah, I sent you that.
So I thought a very nice piece.
Yeah, and it's still, relatively current. Not much has happened that wasn't covered in that PowerPoint, that presentation.
Any, Dale, as I recall, let me just ask you a couple of specifics real quick.
Sure.
That there wasn't much potential in this state for oil. It was mostly helium because of the types of strata that we had here. Wasn't that pretty correct?
Well, I don't want to downgrade the potential for oil. I think there's areas like in Black Mesa, the Black Mesa Basin up on the Navajo and Hopi reservations. I think there's potential there for a very large oil and gas field, similar to what produces oil in southeastern Utah, the Anna field, or over in northwestern New Mexico in the San Juan Basin, where they're producing oil and gas and have been for, Anna field has produced over 400 million barrels of oil. Mm-hmm. And I think there's potential, particularly in the Black Mesa Basin of northeastern Arizona, for that. Now, of course, that would be based upon testing. You'd have to drill holes to find out whether the oil is actually there. But so I think there's great potential there, and in southeastern Arizona, which is very similar to the geology there is very similar to the Permian Basin in New Mexico and West Texas. I think there's potential there. And there have been wells drilled in all of these places, and all ending up in dry holes. But in oil and gas exploration, you're going to get 90% failures when you drill holes on prospects. So there's still potential. And so, Frank, I may have said something to that effect, what you just told me. But I don't want to. I definitely want to emphasize that we still have a potential, and even up in the northwestern part of the state, it's close to oil fields in southwestern Utah, so there's potential there. Of course, the Grand Canyon is there. You'd have to avoid that, but if you get away from the Grand Canyon far enough, and you'd have these rocks that are producing oil and gas in other places that are there. And Nevada has oil and gas production from these basins, like the salt basins that we have in Arizona. So I definitely want to emphasize that there is potential.
Okay. Any other questions for Dale?
They got the CO2 field there too, St. John's.
Dennis? Anything else?
Nothing else.
Okay. I'm not hearing any questions. Let's move on to the report by the chairman. The only thing I would have to say, well, I really don't have anything other than we've been working with the administrator of DEQ on a variety of different things, from websites to support for Dennis, and all of that potentially is moving along in a way that would be beneficial to us. It depends on a few other outcomes. Other than that, I don't have anything to report. Any questions? Not hearing any questions, let me move on to the legislation affecting the Oil and Gas Commission. There's been 3 pieces of legislation. One is a corrective piece to just correct some of the wording, and that's moving along. I don't see any issues with that. Another one has been on funding, and that is moving along. Another one was on hydraulic fracturing, and that's going nowhere. Other than that, that's as far as legislation that I know of. Any questions?
There was one for funding? Funding was the second one,
Mm-hmm.
for the commission?
Just a different source at DEQ, that's all, versus the
was
existing.
Dennis going to tell us about the assistant that he might have?
Waiting for the announcements. He's going to do that in the announcements.
Let's just wait on that one.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Well, I was going to introduce her in the announcements is what it's going to
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's what I mean. Fantastic. You're going to do that on the announcements section? Yes. Okay. Call to the public. Is there anybody that would like to ask any, not ask any questions, has any statements for us from the public?
Yeah, it is. Joe Dixon with the State Land Department. We've had, we had the Carmen Bonanno as number 4 state well there that you guys granted the temporary abandonment status for 5 years. The lease that is drilled on hasn't been paid for about the past 9 months. So we've sent Carmen a couple of notices, and if we don't get something back from him here pretty soon, we're going to default his lease and possibly cancel it out. So that might seriously impact the. I mean, at that point, he would have no right to be out there and have the well out there either. So may have to revisit that here.
Just a personal note here, Joe. It's going to be. We're going to be sorry to see you go, but happy for you.
I'm happy to. Thank you.
And who's your replacement?
Jason Applenalp is the new mineral section manager. He couldn't make it today because he had another meeting with somebody else there, but he will be here in future meetings. Don't be surprised if I don't call in here one of these meetings here too.
Yeah, I'd like to say something to Joe.
Go ahead, Dale.
Yeah, Joe and I go back quite a few years. We've had a long association.
2002, I think.
Much of having to do with oil and gas leasing and things in relative to the Oil and Gas Commission. So, Joe, I'm sorry I'm going to miss you. Good luck. Are you going to Oklahoma?
Yes, we are. I have a little place rented back there. So,
then you can go back there and invest in oil and gas development.
That's right.
Much more certain.
I might sit on some of the Oklahoma meetings there. That might be interesting. Yeah, it was interesting, Dale, too. I was clearing, going through stuff in my office. I actually found the file from the SMA 2002 meeting out here in Phoenix that I kind of roped you into being my session vice chairman there. So.
That's right. I value that experience.
Yeah.
Thanks for doing that.
Well, again, best of luck to you, Joe, and everything you're doing. Don't stay in touch.
I will.
Okay. Anything else? Okay. On to review. Item 8: review and consideration for future agenda items. Does anybody have anything for our future agenda? Not hearing anything. We'll move on to announcements.
So I wanted to introduce Madeline Greenbaum, who is hopefully going to be, we'll say, a permanent fixture at these meetings to help me with writing minutes. As Frank mentioned in his report by the chairman, Frank's been working with Maziel Cabrera and others at ADQ and the executive leadership team to reallocate funding and improve resources and enhance abilities of the commission to do its job. And Madeline is a valuable addition to do that for taking notes, writing up minutes, and maybe some other behind-the-scenes work. So she'll probably be attending every meeting. She is a graduate student majoring in environmental management. She's employed full-time with ADQ, but I think she's got just the right background to help us out and understand what's going on. And be a valuable member of the team. So glad she's here.
Welcome.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Anything else? I see no, do we have any reason to be do an executive session?
I don't think so.
I don't think so either. And
Dennis? I don't think so.
do I hear a motion for adjournment?
So moved.
All in, second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. We're adjourned.
Okay.